welcome to another episode of Happy, Healthy, Skeptical. We are your hosts, Jennifer Hobson and Christy Palermo, and today we are talking about the fear of failure. I know I just said failure, very happy, Christy, but I want to ask you, and I think failure is an important topic to talk about, and sometimes we're a little bit too much gloom and doom around failure, so I think that worked out. The question for you, Christy, is, does the fear of failure currently hold you back from things that you do want to achieve?
Oh, such a question that I think we can all relate to, that you think about it and you're like, yep, 100% for sure there are things holding me back. And I'll just say, I might have mentioned it on a previous episode, I don't know, but there's a part of me that knows my next version of myself is meant to be a speaker, a motivational speaker. And so I know that is the next steps, but there is this fear of the unknown, of taking the next steps that I just haven't gone ahead. So right now I'm using the excuse of, well, I'm literally about to have a baby. So it's just, I would rather take the time when I can really dive into it. But there's definitely a part of me that is terrified of something so totally new, even though it's a part of where my business, I believe, is headed. But the idea of something so much bigger is definitely holding me back, even though I know maybe it's not the perfect season, but it's not just that. It's definitely the fear of what's to come and the fear of failing at something so big. And I can actually relate it to my performance career, because I know there's a part of me, I've been trying to dig into like what it is I'm so afraid of. And I think it's being my own manager to myself, as I was as a performer, where I would try to get hired for individual jobs. And there were some phases where it was working out well and I was getting jobs pretty regularly. And then there was a season where it was not flowing and it was really difficult. And I can feel myself going back to that and not wanting to have to do that all over again, even though it's a totally different journey, totally different story that's going to come out of it. And I'll learn new things and it's going to be different. I know that, but I'm trying to really dive into what it is, what part of it I'm afraid of. And so that's actually helping, because then I can talk myself out of it and realize like how silly that is too. So yeah, I think it's definitely holding me back and has held me back, but I'm doing the work to work through it so that I'm taking the action and activity, even if it's a small little steps of maybe it's a little research to make myself feel more confident, feel better about the next step that's coming. So I'm going to turn it around to you. How about you, Jen?
Well, I love that you were sharing those things, because I loved how you finished it up and said, I'm doing the work to get through it, because so many of us choose paralyzation versus saying, you know what, even though I'm afraid, I'm going to do these things anyway, right? So I really think, I have grown so much as an entrepreneur, even as a mom, and the next big versions, kind of like you said, we're always thinking of what's the next version for us. And that's not that there's anything wrong with the current version of ourselves. And I'm here to clarify that there's nothing wrong with the current version of you. But again, if you're not growing, you're not just staying stagnant, you're actually going backwards. So what is the next version of you? And sometimes it's in your personality, sometimes it's in your attributes, and sometimes it's in the things that you accomplish. And I think for me, fear of failure shows up not just in big ways, but even like tiny things, right? I think Christine and I have shared before that we both at some point we wanted to learn how to play the piano, right? And maybe it was a time thing, maybe it's because life is busy, all these other things, or maybe it's because in the back of my head I'm 38 years old, and how silly would I look going to a piano teacher and saying, hey, I want to learn the piano, and having to start literally from scratch and feel so silly, because so many of us, we care what other people think, whether or not we acknowledge it. There's that tiny voice in the back of our head saying, if I do this, what are other people going to think about me? And so many times in our industry, network marketing, people say no, or they wait and wait and wait, or even after they say yes to the business, they still don't show up as the person they deserve to show up because they're holding themselves back because of this fear of failure and what other people will think when they fail. And they're qualifying their own failure too. And I think even I have done that in the past is I'm the one saying what failure is. Someone looking out to the inside of what I'm doing, they might not actually think that I failed, even though I am qualifying it as a failure. So small things sometimes definitely show up as, starting a new hobby. Because I think even as children, we want to do things we're good at. Because that's what our culture and our community has said is, you want to play a sport because you want to play a sport to win. And I'm here and I'm for that in a lot of ways. However, I think when we've had that mindset for so long, we lose the enjoyment of the things that we love to do. And unless we can be the best at it, unless we can win all the games, unless we can be perfect, then we choose not to do it at all and we lose the joy. So I think, I always love that you put the question back on me because I think fear of failure does show up and you have to constantly work through it. Whether it's in the small things where I may have avoided starting to play the piano, or it's in the big things where I am currently building the beginning of a multi-million dollar business, and saying that out loud is a little bit scary, right? Like, I am the owner of Hops and Health. What was taking the first step was creating the business. You know what I mean? Am I at a multi-billion dollar income? Not yet. And those are the types of words you need to talk about when you're talking about the things that scare the crap out of you. So how are you supporting the things that scare the crap out of you rather than say, you know what? I'm frozen in paralyzation and qualifying what constitutes failing. You're the one deciding whether or not you're failing. And I think that's what I've had to work through in many different aspects of my life, not just business, not just as a mom, not just as a wife, but even in just personality traits, right? I might think I'm a failure because I'm not warm and fuzzy. Well, you know what? There's other things that I am good at and I can always get better. But if I'm not learning the lesson, then I'm definitely failing. And I don't know about you, but I'm sure you've looked back at times, Christy, and go, you know what? It was a failure and I've learned this, or it wasn't a failure because I took this away.
And nobody can see me, but I'm sitting here nodding my head. Yes, absolutely. Because we don't want to support the failure. I love that you said it that way. You don't want to feed the failure, because that's where it can grow. The fear of whatever it is to come. It's the unknown, which nobody's a freaking mind reader or future reader. Like, we don't know what's coming anyway. So fearing that is just going to, I don't want to use, I want to say the word sabotage, but that's not the word I'm really looking for. But it's going to hold you back. So really focusing on what you're saying, like, what can you take out of it? Like, thinking of past moments. And I had mentioned this book before in the past with Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way. And I just remembered now that there was some work that she has you do. It's like a workbook, even though you don't have to be an artist to do it. It could just be a goal that you have in mind. But I remember it's like you have to revisit the parts of your past that really come up uncomfortable for you. When you think about it, you think, oh, there's that pit in my stomach, like I failed, or man, that did not go the way I planned. But it's like, actually, you have to revisit those moments. And back to journaling, as I always talk about journaling, and revisiting it in journaling and trying to figure out what it is about that moment in time that you feel like you failed so hard or that you feel went so bad. Because once you can identify what it is about the situation, you can start to then pick up the lessons out of it. And until you have the lessons, you're going to continue to reject even thinking about those scenarios, because there are definitely times in my past, we all have them, there are times you think about them and your palms get sweaty and you're just like, I just don't want to think about it, that was a horrible moment. But if you really just address it and figure out what it was that you, and sometimes it is just being like, yep, I really messed that up and I realize what I did wrong, but now I know not to do that. But if you never address that, you're not fine tuning and figuring out those things you need to grow from. And then it's not failure if you, one, take a lesson, and two, it's not failure if you keep going. We both have our network marketing businesses, health coaching. And so Jen and I work with people all the time that are building their own businesses and they feel like they're failing, but yet they're still in the game. So it's like, you're not failing because you're still here. It's just this mindset of thinking that you're failing, but really, okay, let's address it. Like, what is it that you're feeling anyway? Because once you address the emotional side of it, you usually need to get into the literal side of things of like, okay, for a business, maybe it's looking at numbers, maybe it's looking at your activity, maybe it depends on what you need to look at. And then that takes the emotional side out and helps you work through. And again, you're not failing if you're actually still in the game and you're still doing it. It's just lessons along the way.
For sure. And I love that you use the word emotion more than once because so much of failure is rooted in emotion. And, not that I always want people to go to the logical side. Sometimes the logical side can sabotage you, but take the emotion out of it because if you think about it, and I would love to ask you, Christy, but if there is a time that you failed and you still guilt yourself, because I think this is where we are super destructive to our own success. We spend lots and lots of time maybe focusing or thinking about it or guilting ourselves about something we have or someone we were in the past, and maybe it was only for a very short amount of time, and I already know my head's already going there was this version of me and she existed between about 2004 and 2007, right? So that's 3 years of my life, and she is not my favorite version of me by any means. Did she learn a whole shit about herself? She's learned a lot about herself. And what I have learned from that version of me is things that I will never accept, things that I have created boundaries from, things that I will not allow myself to do anymore, and who I will never be again. So when I look at it, I could use the word failure, or I could look and say, you know what? No, that's actually where I had the most growth because I learned so much about who I don't want to be and what I will not accept. However, there is still that tiny little personal destructive habit of still feeling a little bit guilty about who I allowed myself to be. And I'm sure we can all relate, but when you think about it, there's just that small version. It was a small amount of time, yet you're spending 3 times, 5 times, 10 times more in length than that time actually deserved to feel any guilt. And you need to let it go, or it will just eat away at you and it will take away from developing into the best version of you because that other one doesn't exist anymore. I have to name her and like put her in a box and just bury her because she doesn't exist anymore. I'm not even close to that person. So why would I spend one moment of my time even thinking about her or any of the decisions that she made? And I don't know if there's any time, and you don't have to share specifically, but is there a version of you or something you have done in the past that you have given way too much of your energy to?
Yeah, I would agree with what you're saying, where it was probably in my early to mid 20s that same is like the decisions I made, the things I was doing, like it was just that version of myself. But you're correct. When I think back on that, that's where I learned a whole hell of a lot about myself and lessons about life. But I think I think that's what your 20s kind of are for.
Yeah.
So as we talked about, it's addressing those moments and like what you took out of it and just vowing to not do certain things or to make sure, like you said, having certain boundaries and not revisiting that person anymore, because you're right, it's such a small time frame in our life that why dwell on it when then you think about like the last 5 years. Holy moly, look at all the amazing things you've done. Let's dwell on that stuff. Let's focus
Right?
on the good and all the accomplishments, and yes, the lessons these last 5 years too. Of course there's those within there, but the old versions of ourselves are what's helping us get through these lessons now, and making sure that we do focus on the accomplishments and the good things that we're doing. And a lot of people talk about it being a little too frou-frou, but sometimes it is just sitting for a minute in the day and giving yourself gratitude for something you did, or gratitude in your life. I know that word gets tossed around a lot, but if you feel the emotional connection of gratitude, of like, I'm actually glad I went through that because I learned this, like, let yourself feel the gratitude for it and then release it. And it can help you, one, move past it, and two, feel the gratitude in the moment that's going to change and shift your energy to what you're doing today.
Well, and I think that's where I have been able to grow, and I've released a lot of anger and energy around certain things. There's relationships in our life, right? All kinds of relationships. We talked about relationships before. Maybe they're romantic, maybe they're friendships, maybe they're working partnerships. And, not everyone is meant to be around for every single season. There are going to be those few core people that are, and they will always be there no matter what. However, we have to be accepting of the idea that not all relationships are meant to be there forever. They're meant to be there for that time and that place in your life, and letting go of, that relationship doesn't still exist for whatever reason. It doesn't mean you failed at creating a relationship. It just means it was time for that relationship to end. And if you take the time and identify the lessons from that relationship, or whatever, it doesn't need to be a relationship, but a decision that you made, an accomplishment that you went for and you missed, maybe a success that you did achieve and it didn't turn out the way you thought it would, but take the time and go, what are the lessons that I learned from these different scenarios, and how can I apply them as I move forward and grow? And if you're not acknowledging the lesson, that is the only time I would say you have failed, or I have failed. If I am not willing to acknowledge the lesson, and whether it's me taking responsibility for what happened, or seeing that one of the tiny little decisions along the way, whether it be in a relationship or a job or a decision that I made, I have to take that responsibility. And I think that's a big part of failure too, is a lot of us are afraid of taking responsibility. Because when we think of failure, we just think maybe there's no other way to go. It's like this wall. People think of failure literally that, like, if I fail, I can't get past this wall. That's end, period, the end. It's the end of my story. When that's not necessarily true, because you know what? If if failure was the end, my life would have ended a long time ago, because I have failed many, many times along the way. And I think if we don't take the time to identify the lesson, acknowledge that failure is good for our growth and development, and then apply it. That's the other thing. You can identify the lesson, but if you don't learn from it and apply it, go forward, then you're going to fail at the same thing over and over and over again until you make a change. And I just kind of, my thoughts I want to finish up, and I want to give you a chance, Christy, is, you know, we're always going to go right to avoiding failure. If it feels uncomfortable, or it's just not what we thought maybe would be easy. And I think I've shared this before. Brene Brown in Rising Strong talks about this. We have created a culture that is adverse to failure. And I am here to create a culture that embraces failure. I'm here to tell you that if it scares you, if it's uncomfortable, but you know you're going to come out better on the other side, do it anyway. Do it scared. Do it blind. Do it
Mm-hmm.
anyway. And I don't know how you feel about, the stuff that I shared, Chrissy, but I think we usually have some pretty similar thoughts. But I would love to know what you think about all of it.
Yeah, do it anyway. I totally agree with that. I think that's a great thing. I love that you call it how did you say it? You want to create a community of
A
people,
community and a culture, right? That
a
embraces
culture. That's what it
failure.
is. Yeah, I love that idea of creating culture around embracing it and doing it anyway. And we see it comes up as quotes, do it anyway, but really you're always going to feel the fear. Like, it's always going to be there. So it's not trying to replace the fear. And usually the stronger the fear, the more likely you're meant to do it. So embracing that discomfort, that's the word you use too, the discomfort of it, because it shouldn't be comfortable. When you're comfortable, you are complacent and you're coasting. The discomfort is the cue that you need to move forward with what you're doing. That is the cue. So some things to, as we're wrapping up talking about this subject, some things to take away is, first of all, take responsibility, as you had just mentioned. Sometimes it is just taking responsibility for whatever thing in the past you feel like you failed at. Two, I have give you a little challenge to actually go back whenever there's those moments you think about the things that you feel like you failed at the most or you had the hardest time in your past. Journal even one page on it. I'm challenging you, just try it out and see what comes out of it and see if you can find, because there's always going to be a lesson in it. So again, back to number one, taking responsibility sometimes for whatever it was, but also trying to identify the lesson within it so that can help you move forward and break away from that mental failure attachment to whatever it was. The next thing is just to, well, I guess I just said it, but to rename it as a lesson, as instead of failure. And then number four around failure, as you kind of mentioned a moment ago too, is letting yourself be open to play of learning something new, letting ourselves think of ourselves as, I'm repeating myself there, letting us think of ourselves as children again when we're learning something new and being open to the play side of, say, a new hobby, say, venturing into a new business. Maybe you're tiptoeing into it and then trying not to have this huge fear of it. Like for me, for speaking, like I need to learn it as a beginner and allow myself to be a beginner and be okay with that, and not trying to go into it being like I need to be an expert in the first week that I think try doing this, and
Yeah.
allow for that open play um and mindset as of a child with learning something new.
And I have one last one, Christy, for people to think of as we wrap up is, what is the one thing, just pick one, that you have not tried because you've been afraid to fail? The one thing. And both Christy and I want to encourage you, you haven't tried it just because of the emotion around failure. This is your time to try it.
Yep. And I'm just going to add on, I will say that my thing that I did for speaking is I went to a free class at the library about public speaking. And I was like, okay, this is step number one. So if I can do it, you can do it. Find one step. I totally agree with that.
Absolutely. So thank you again for joining us. We can't wait to have you listen to us next time on our next episode. So join the conversation. You can follow us on Instagram at Happy Healthy Skeptical, and definitely comment in the sections on Spotify. We leave questions for you if you didn't know. So make sure you leave us an answer so we can get back to you. But we always enjoy our time with you. So till next time, thank you.